Are you ready for a new adventure? Time to travel back in time, let's go! Are you ready for a new adventure? Let's learn about the past with Anna and Leo.
Hi friends! Welcome to Unlock This, a podcast from Honest History, where we join our friends Anna, Leo, and Percy on adventures through time and uncover some really cool stories along the way. My name is William. I'm 6 years old, and I love learning about history, especially new stories that I don't hear about in school. I can't wait for today's story, and I think you're gonna love it too. So let's dive in.
Hey, Anna, have you ever eaten an oyster?
Those are the sea creatures with rough and bumpy shells, right?
Yeah, and you have to open up the shell to get to the oyster inside. That's the part you eat.
I've never had one. They seem kind of squishy and slippery.
I tried one for the first time last night. It kind of tasted like the ocean, but I liked it. It was definitely slippery.
I've only really seen them at fancy restaurants. Aren't oysters expensive?
These days they are, but my uncle was telling me that it wasn't always like that. In fact, back in the 1800s, oysters were so cheap that nearly everyone ate them.
Really?
At that time, you could find oyster stalls lining the streets of New York, kind of like how you can find hot dog stalls today.
So oysters were once as popular as hot dogs? I never would have thought.
My uncle was also telling me about a man who opened an oyster restaurant back then. He became so rich that people called him the Oyster King.
Who was he?
His name was Thomas Downing. Hey, maybe we can learn about him today. What do you think, Anna?
I like that idea. Let's see if we can find Percy. Percy, are you around? Percy, is there anything in the vault about a man named Thomas Downing? He became famous for his oyster restaurant.
Let's follow Percy to the vault.
I think he wants us to look in that drawer over there.
I can open it.
What is it, Leo?
It's an old newspaper. It has the date 1866 at the top.
Percy said we need to open it and find a certain page.
Hey, look! On this page it says Thomas Downing, and there's the word obituary above it. I wonder what that means.
Well, hopefully we'll find out soon, because it feels like we're about to travel! Hold tight!
I think we've traveled to a city.
But it looks different from any city I've ever been to. I don't see any cars or buses on the street. Instead, people are riding in carriages pulled by horses.
Hey, look! There's a man on the corner selling newspapers. Maybe the newspaper can tell us where we've traveled to.
Good idea. I'll get a newspaper. The paper says New York Daily Tribune at the top.
Well, that would make sense. Thomas Downing lived in New York when he started his restaurant.
I wonder if his restaurant is nearby. If it is, then he sure found a nice spot. Some of these buildings are pretty fancy looking. And I just noticed, there's a sign on the side of that building. It says Broad Street.
And Thomas Downing's restaurant was located on Broad Street, which means it is nearby.
So he opened an oyster restaurant somewhere close to all these fancy buildings?
Yes, he did that on purpose. You see, he thought if he had a restaurant here, then he could get all the wealthy businessmen to dine at his place.
And wealthy businessmen had money to spend. That's clever thinking.
It was also a good place to open an oyster restaurant because it was close to the harbor.
You're right, Leo. I can see the ocean in the distance. Let's walk that way to get a closer look. There's some boats coming into the harbor, and it looks like they've been fishing for something.
Oysters! Do you see the nets sitting on the ship deck? They're filled with oysters.
So, Thomas Downing would get oysters from these fishermen?
Yes, it was a very short trip from the harbor to the restaurant, so his oysters were always fresh. Sometimes Downing even went to gather oysters himself. He wanted to make sure he got the best quality for the best price.
Percy said we should walk back down to Broad Street. He said Downing's restaurant isn't too far from here.
While we're walking, I guess I can tell you more about Thomas Downing.
Yes, please. Do you know where he was born or where he grew up?
He was born in 1791 in Virginia. Downing was African American and lived during a time when many African Americans were enslaved. Enslaved people were forced to work with others and rarely earned money for themselves. Downing's parents had been enslaved, but they gained their freedom before he was born.
So that meant Downing was also free, and his family was able to work for themselves and start their own businesses.
Yeah, that's exactly what he did. His family bought land on an island in Virginia and began selling oysters. Downing spent his childhood digging and gathering oysters, and you could say he became quite the expert. He could always spot the best oysters in a pile.
Which would come in handy when he opened his restaurant. But how did he get from Virginia to New York?
Well, first he joined the U.S. Army and went with the Army to Philadelphia. There, he met his wife and opened his very first oyster bar. At that time, most oyster bars were owned and operated by Black Americans. The bars were usually located in cellars underground, so you would have to walk down a steep set of stairs to get into them. And once you were there, you could get oysters for a good price. With just 6 cents in your pocket, you could buy a dozen oysters.
So oysters were really cheap food back then.
Yeah, they weren't just for the wealthy. Nearly everyone ate oysters.
Percy says we should stop here. Do you think this is Downing's restaurant?
Let's go inside and find out.
Hi friends, are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code UNLOCKTHIS for 10% off. Again, that special code is UNLOCKTHIS. Okay, let's get back to the story.
Wow! Look at this place! It's definitely a fancy restaurant. Check out that chandelier hanging from the ceiling. That looks expensive.
And all the people here are eating oysters. This must be Thomas Downing's restaurant.
But Leo, you said oysters were cheap and everyone ate them. So why would they be served in such a fancy restaurant?
That was all Downing's idea. You remember I said he opened an oyster bar in Philadelphia? Well, years later, he heard that New York was the place to be if you wanted to sell oysters. So he packed his bags and moved his family to the big city. And when he got here, he didn't want to just open another oyster bar. He wanted to open a beautiful restaurant so he could attract New York's wealthiest customers. So he picked a spot in New York's financial district. This was a place buzzing with bankers, businessmen, journalists, and politicians. He decorated his restaurant windows with beautiful curtains and covered the floors with elegant carpets. And he added chandeliers and fine tablecloths, all to attract the top of New York society. And you know what? It worked! Soon his restaurant was filled with people, mostly wealthy white men, who came to dine on oysters.
So this is Thomas Downing's restaurant.
Yes, and Downing did something else that was different for his time. In the 1820s, women didn't usually go to eat at restaurants because, well, they weren't very nice places. Many restaurants were dark and dingy, and they weren't considered suitable for ladies. But as you can see, plenty of women came to Downing's restaurant. He made it a beautiful space that men wanted to bring their wives and families to.
Wait, so restaurants weren't very nice back in the day?
A lot of them weren't. When Downing opened his place, people were only starting to open fine dining restaurants. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I see Thomas Downing over there.
It looks like he's opening an oyster for the people sitting at the table.
I have selected the very best for you this evening, ladies and gentlemen. These came in fresh this morning.
Downing always knew how to pick the best oyster. That is another reason why his restaurant was so popular. People knew they'd be getting a good meal when they came here. In fact, his oysters were in such high demand that he started mailing them to Europe. Even the Queen of England, Queen Victoria, was a huge fan of Downing's oysters.
Oh, wow! So Downing was known around the world.
Yes, and soon he was making a lot of money from his oysters. Downing would become one of the richest people in New York.
And so that's why people started calling him the Oyster King.
Exactly. But there's a part of Downing's story that he didn't want his customers to know about. He was hiding a secret underneath the floorboards of this very restaurant.
What was it?
Maybe I can show you. Let's see if we can find a door somewhere.
Percy said we should go in here. Look, there's a door. There's some stairs. It looks like they're going to some sort of room underneath the restaurant.
I think these stairs go to the cellar. That's where Downing stored oysters and wine. But there was something else. Follow me. Let's walk through here. I think I hear something.
Leo, there are people in here.
Downing's restaurant wasn't just a place to eat oysters, it was also a place for people to hide. You see, at this time, many enslaved people were trying to escape. Most of them were trying to get to Canada where they could be free, but it was very dangerous. They could be caught and sold back into slavery at any moment. Downing let people come to his restaurant so they had a safe place to hide. Although his oyster restaurant only served to white customers, he made sure his restaurant was helping black people too.
So all these people are here on their way to Canada? And Downing is helping them escape from slavery.
Yeah, his restaurant was a part of the Underground Railroad.
Oh, wait. I learned about the Underground Railroad in school. It was a network of secret routes and houses that people used to escape slavery. People used the Underground Railroad before the Civil War, when slavery was still allowed in the United States.
That's right. Downing's Oyster House was one of the secret houses that enslaved people hid. Downing was an abolitionist, which meant that he believed slavery should stop. And as a wealthy black American, he did what he could to help enslaved people gain their freedom. He used his influence and money to set up schools for black children and societies fighting for black rights.
So his restaurant was important to a lot of people.
Let's head back upstairs. Maybe we can explore a bit more.
Good idea. You know, some of those oysters actually look pretty good. I always thought you had to eat them raw, but people at this table look like they're eating cooked oysters.
You could get all kinds of oysters at Downing's restaurant. You could order them raw, fried, scalloped, served in a pie, or pickled.
Pickled? What does that mean?
You know, I'm not sure.
Percy says pickled means it's been soaked in vinegar and water. I wonder what a pickled oyster tastes like.
Maybe we can find some in the restaurant's kitchen. Let's follow that waiter. That's probably where he's going.
This looks like a kitchen to me.
There's some jars over here. I think they're filled with pickled oysters. Do you want to try one?
Okay. It smells interesting. Well, here goes nothing.
What do you think?
It's chewier than I thought. Percy, do you want to try one? Percy said he prefers cheese, and I think I agree with him. But at least I can say I've had an oyster now.
Not just any oyster, an oyster from the restaurant of the Oyster King.
That's true. So, Leo, what happened to Thomas Downing and his restaurant?
Downing kept his restaurant open until his death 1866. After that, his son ran the restaurant for a few more years. Downing was 75 years old when he died, and it was very clear how important he had become to the city. Many of his customers had become businessmen and merchants. Because so many of them wanted to attend his funeral, the New York Chamber of Commerce closed for the day, just so all these people could go to his funeral.
Leo, you said he died in 1866. Wasn't that the date of the newspaper we found in the vault?
You're right. And I did see the name Thomas Downing in the newspaper, with the word obituary above it, but I still don't know what that word means.
Percy said an obituary is a notice that someone has died, and it gives details about their life.
Oh, so the article in the paper must be about Thomas Downing, and it is written right after he died.
You must be right, Leo, because I think we're about to travel again.
Ooh, we're back in the vault.
Let's take a look at that newspaper Percy showed us.
It says the well-known caterer and oysterman Thomas Downing died on Tuesday last at his residence in the city.
It also says that he acquired a large fortune. It's crazy to think about all of the things that Downing was able to do because of his restaurant. It's definitely going to make me look at oysters differently. Although, I'm not sure if I'm ready to eat another one.
Maybe we could try fried oysters next time. Those sound like they would be tasty. What do you think, Percy?
Percy's still going to stick with his cheese.
Welcome back. That sure was a great adventure. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna tell all my friends about this amazing story. That's all for now. But if you want to learn more, be sure to check out my favorite magazine for kids, Honest History. There's a ton of stuff to learn in each issue, and I love the fun activities and questions. Bye! This episode was narrated by Nikki and JoAnn Schinderle and written by Heidi Coburn. The production was read by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow for updates on social media.